I'm Dylan Bates and I'm coming at you on behalf of FUTBIN to bring you a complete guide to player switching in EAFC 24. Lo and behold, come with the hour, come with the switching technique, we have right stick switching. The right stick is your ticket to switching to any player on the pitch that you would desire when it comes to player switching in EAFC. First up, the settings. Now this has actually brought controversy in terms of what are the best settings for right stick switching. In my opinion, as well as in the opinion of many pro players in the scene, player relative is the most desired player switching setting that you're going to want to use when it comes to right stick switching. This is simply because with player relative, you're able to select any player around the player that you already have selected. So as long as you're able to use a player in between the player you already have selection of to switch to then switch to the further player on the pitch. And this is simply why the majority of professional FIFA players use player relative. It's so that if they need to track a runner who is further away on the pitch, they can flick the stick twice, once to the player who is next to the player that you already had selection of, and then a second time into the defender who is further away on the pitch. And lastly, when it comes to player switching sensitivity, this is something that you guys are going to want to play around with to see what works for you. Me personally, I like this set to 8 because I feel as though it is quicker off the switch when I attempt to switch to a player with the right stick. But some people like it on a lower sensitivity because it requires a bit more of a caressed flick with the stick as you're attempting to select the player that you desire. Moving into L1 switching, and this is where I want to leave a bit of a disclaimer before we get into the details of L1 switching and when best to use this. When a professional FIFA player is switching, they are using the right stick around 90% of the time and L1 switching around 10% of the time. Now when it comes to L1 switching, you will notice that the player second closest to the ball will have a dull arrow above his head, and this will be the player that will end up selecting once you tap the L1 button. And there will be times when you are defending around the 18-yard box where the player with this arrow above his head will be the player that you desire to select because he is right next to the defender that you already have selection of, and that selection is necessary because of the flow of the play or a particular skill move that the opponent is making, which will then obviously require you guys to select that player with L1. Another situation where L1 switching will come into play and will require you to use this technique is when you are second man pressing. Obviously, as we know, L1 switching switches to the closest player nearest to the ball, which simply means when you're covering an inside pass or you're tracking a runner after right stick switching to the defender to then run alongside that attacker making the run, that the second man presser that you're using to essentially press the ball carrier will sometimes need to be selected to then get that tackle in manually. And this is when L1 switching can come into play. Other than that, if I am completely honest, these are really the only two situations that you're going to want to tap that L1 button, because right stick will be your best friend once you start to learn the various techniques that I'm about to break down for you. First up, we have tracking runs, and this is one of the first steps that we can start implementing into our defensive game to start improving right stick switching. If you see any runner making a run in behind, you should be selecting to the closest defender near that runner with the right stick to then run alongside him. This is super important because if you do not track runners in EAFC, you will be left vulnerable to the counter-attack every single time. Now you are probably wondering, well, how do we press the ball carrier when we are tracking a run? You know, if we just track runners all day, the ball carrier is going to have so much time on the ball. That is where second man press does come in. And of course, as I was saying before, the L1 selection technique, where once that second man presser gets closer to the ball carrier, you want to select him with L1 to then get the tackle in manually. Second up, we have anticipating the pass with right stick switching. You see, there will be times when you will read a pass into a striker or read a pass into a winger, a midfielder, even a wingback. This will be the time that you guys need to anticipate that pass and use the right stick to essentially select the defender closest to him and anticipate the pass into the attacker. And this is how we be proactive in the defense. Not reactive, but proactive. We are actively selecting the defender closest to the attacker that we are actually anticipating the opponent to pass into, to then run in front of him and anticipate that pass. And this can only be done with right stick switching, simply because L1 won't necessarily select the defender that's further away from the ball, which will be necessary to actually anticipate your opponent. Next up, we have squeezing the opponent. Essentially what squeezing an opponent entails is you guys selecting between 3 defenders at once with the right stick, consistently switching between the 3 of them as you run them up together and using second man press to help you squeeze him. It's about keeping a wall of defenders, and you're wanting to essentially select between all 3 with the right stick very quickly, running them up to keep that wall and squeeze the opponent off the ball. This is how your pro players are always on you if you've ever played one. They're squeezing you, they're suffocating you and leaving you no room to move. This is how they do it. It's with right stick switching. They're switching between each defender, running them up, and essentially using second man press. You're wanting to take the first defender, run him up towards the ball carrier, then select off to a second defender, and as you select off, you're holding R1 or RB on net spots to then run up together. Then you're incorporating a third defender. This third defender, essentially, then will be running up alongside the other 2 defenders. And with that third defender, you're either wanting to run around the side to then keep that wall and squeeze the opponent, or run towards a passing option to cut it off. This is how we squeeze the opponent. And then you're wanting to constantly switch between the 3 to, of course, suffocate him and give him nowhere to go. There will be times where you need to keep the shape of your defense and not leave any gaps or holes for your opponent to exploit. And this is where we use right stick switching to essentially maintain the shape of our defense, whilst also at the same time putting a little bit of pressure. And this is what you're wanting to do. You're wanting to constantly switch to the defenders to keep them in their holes, keep them in their shapes, and keep them in their positions until it becomes a time where you can anticipate, where you can squeeze, or where you can truck an opponent. And that entails constantly switching between your defenders to put a bit of pressure onto the ball carrier and to ensure that your opponent is going to continue to attack, because we can switch between our defenders, but if we're not running up slightly to put a bit of pressure onto the ball carrier, then he can just sit there and do nothing. So you're wanting to select a defender, run him up slightly, then switch off, run up again with that defender, and continuously do this with all of your defenders, bearing in mind of your defensive formation shape and ensuring that you're going to keep that shape as you run up together and eventually wait for a good time to press the opponent, anticipate him, or track the run. So there you have it. It's a short but sweet breakdown of player switching in EAFC. I highly recommend you guys throwing yourself in the game, forcing yourself to use right stick so that you can practice getting the angles, practice getting quick at this switching technique, so that you can start incorporating these absolutely essential techniques to defending in EAFC 24.